Do you see me? Am I looking at you?
I see you, I hear you,
And
and we are about to go live on Facebook, and also, I think we're being streamed on Facebook as we speak right now. Yeah.
we're here. We're already on Facebook. And
Yeah. So before we get started, let me share the literary talk with everybody. Share options. All right, Grady.
yes, hello, Patricio.
Here we are live on Facebook.
This is a very special presentation. This is the first
It's a momentous occasion.
This is conversation about books with Miller and Maya.
That's right. That's right. Here we are. Let's reintroduce ourselves for those of viewers who don't know us. We are friends, writers, publishers, and lovers of books, I think, of the word, of the written word. And my name is Patricio Maya, and I have known Grady for a few years now. I don't want to say exactly how long. I don't know that I can say exactly how long, but definitely over a decade.
Yeah, it has been. And the last decade of publications, or near decade, it's coalesced. It's passed in a flash. I think that's always a good thing when you're approaching the speed of light.
I think so. I think we met and we shared the love of literature, right? And we were both writers. You are more. I was writing, but you had already published when we met, right?
Yes. I think this is what we're taking. I think literature. We spoke. It's a very private. It's a private thing.
Mm-hmm.
Does it? We have the challenge before us to make it, share it with more people, to make it that a common topic. It's lived privately. It's often never shared with the zeal or the ephemeral gusto of the movie you saw last week, right?
Exactly. And when we met, we started talking about books, and as the years went by and you started publishing more books, the great short story collection Havana Brotherhood, which I have somewhere around here, authored by Graydon Miller.
Wow.
I helped edit a little bit, or there it is. So I recommend everybody to check it out. It's a collection of stories, mostly, well, they're fictional stories of different kinds, but they have a kind of flavor that joins them together. When did we publish that, Grady?
Around 4 years ago.
4 years ago. And I think that was a watershed moment for us, because after that, you published, and through your publishing, our publishing company, Grady Miller Books, you published my collection of essays.
Yeah, and this to me, this is the watershed.
You're well prepared.
Yes.
Walking around with Fanta Bukowski, 21 essays about art, politics, sex, and the ups and downs of cultural displacement.
And at the time, I said, takes the reader by the throat, never lets you go. And I think this is when I saw what it did for you.
It was a very breakthrough moment for me. Seeing my words in print, I had published in magazines here and there, but seeing my book of essays really did something great for how I thought about myself. And you know, as somebody who's able to finish a big project, and that was a big project that was finished, and then people read it, and you know, I've been really lucky to have you publish that book of mine. And then we published other works. You know, we published your Spanish novel, Mujeres con Navajas, you know, in Spanish.
Yeah.
And that was just recent, and it's still out. You know, it's still being shown to the world. It's still being introduced to the world, and it's here. Okay.
You are prepared.
There you go. I had it as a mouse pad, but it's excellent that way.
Of course, we're here. I'm prepared to put the spotlight on this author that we both will have something much to say about. And
Let me make that little kind of segue from our world of literature into what we're going to talk about today. But you're right to kind of make us focus a little bit. So, you know, we published Aldo Tambellini, who passed away. I have his book somewhere around here, not too long ago, you know, and sadly, but we published his poetry, the collected poems of Aldo Tambellini, and we went to Spain. We've been doing a lot of stuff, but you know, we love books, and we wanted to just kind of start this series of talks about literature, and not only about our books, though we'll talk about them, but also about our books we've published, but also about books or stories, books, poems that we like to read and enjoy. And the first author we've chosen is
the father, the creator of the famed detective Sherlock Holmes, is author Conan Doyle. And here I have
Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. There he is.
In big, beautiful letters, author Conan Doyle's The Lost World, which we shall get to.
It's a book that we share in common, The Lost World.
Yes. This is it's a book that it really sparked me. I was about a fifth grader, and I saw a paperback around my parents' house. I think it was in a box of things they packed up from like 1960, and I opened that book, and it opened my imagination. And the odd thing is that Conan Doyle actually considered it kind of a young boy's book, and I was right at the age when it was a long book. I could sit, and he told me to read it, and I really read it, and it right away it has the characteristics of you can see why Conan Doyle is so popular and has been so popular in radio and movies and television, because it's visual, it's an adventure, it's the way the drama builds is irresistible.
His prose is so perfect. There's a kind of perfection and a kind of natural quality to his prose, you know, that very much comes alive in the stories of Sherlock Holmes, though in the novels too. It's a kind of natural storyteller's ability, and a very kind of signature voice with nice lexicon that he chooses the right words and makes them flow in his descriptions of the city. And you know, so I came to The Lost World much later. I read it like a couple of years ago, but I had no idea that you had read it as a kid, you know, and had such an impact on you. But so we'll talk about that later. But we do also not Sherlock Holmes, but Arthur Conan Doyle is one of the authors that we both share in common. There are many authors that you've read that I haven't, and that I've read that you haven't, and then we'll talk about them later. But Sherlock Holmes, the Sherlock Holmes story collections is something that we both read and enjoy, and most people have, or should.
Yeah, we both share it, and I too, around that, I'd read the started reading Holmes story before Lost World, and those they also with great pleasure. It's the storyteller's pleasure,
Right.
and it's like recreational. It's I think recreational. That's the perfect definition for a kind of literature that
there's an ease to the prose, and it's very much interested. And I think Doyle focuses on the reader. He thinks about the reader. We've talked about this before. Like, you got to be kind to your reader, you know?
kind to your reader. Yeah.
He's not self-pleasing in the sense that he doesn't go off into tangents that take into long detours that are just for himself, but like, he's very kind to the reader, and readers really appreciate that. I came to Doyle through Borges because he had mentioned Doyle a couple of times, and Doyle is not the originator of the detective story. That is Edgar Allan Poe, you can say.
He carries the mantle, yeah.
But so the Edgar Allan Poe story would be the murders of the what is it? The
Rue Morgue.
Rue Morgue, right? And but Doyle really kind of invents, or really brings the new genre of the detective story to a refinement that makes it mature, or brings it into its own, And so Borges has said in an interview that we're all always kind of, whoever writes a detective story is always rewriting a Sherlock Holmes story, in typical Borgian fashion. So, I hadn't read any Sherlock Holmes, but when I read it, I loved it, and I felt some of those echoes of those perfect descriptions of London in the 19th century, in the late 19th century, like 1980s, 1990s.
Yeah, the very midst of the Victorian period, he so epitomizes in its optimism.
Right.
It's very, the foundations are that London, or the countryside, Sussex, and to that he brings always something unexpected. It often is illuminated in a flash by Sherlock Holmes. Of course, our personal guide, as we pointed out, it is Watson. Watson,
right?
Who?
It's not Watsonville, but it's Watson.
No,
right?
No.
Watsonville being the small city, the town that Graydon writes about in his novel Mujeres con Navajas, and where his novel takes place. But Watson he's the voice that we really get into, when we read. And there's something so attractive about the tone and the voice of Sherlock Holmes. It's so reassuring, and also non-pretentious, but so itself, right?
Yeah, Watson, he holds you by the hand, and the background of it is their friendship,
right?
Their joint. Holmes comments about that they both share a love of the bizarre and things outside the humdrum routine. That's it. And outwardly, of course, Watson is a stolid medical man, and he's a foil for the lightning perception of Holmes, and it's sort of an icy character, I would say.
Right. So, you know, we think as we read, we think we're there for Sherlock Holmes, who's great. I mean, he's amazing to get to know, and a complex character, or a character with not super psychologically complex, but complex in the sense of being interesting, and having different sort of layers, right? And very unique. Whereas Watson is a more quote unquote normal character. He's a doctor, like, you know, like Doyle was a doctor, and but it is his voice as chronicler of the stories that we read when we read Sherlock Holmes' story. So that's our first kind of finding, right? That we love the Watson voice. We love the Sherlock Holmes character, but it is the Watson voice, the voice of Watson, that we really are there for. That it's warm, it's learned, it's straightforward, it's intelligent, it's urban, you know, it's open-minded, right?
Yeah, he's open to what the revelation may be at the end of the mystery, and he's very humane. He's a person with very good heart, and I don't see a cynical bone in the.
There's nothing twisted about him.
No, there isn't.
Not even his lip.
And that, yeah, like as the case of the man with the twisted lip.
So let's get into it. So like our goal here, I mean, we're going to talk, this is just conversations about literature. So we're going to have a lot of conversations about literature, but our goal is also to focus on one work at a time, right? We might segue into other things too, or we might have a parenthesis here and there, but our goal is to just kind of give it its due focus, okay? Its due time. And the story for today is The Man with the Twisted Lip, which is in the collected Sherlock Holmes stories. And, you know, we could have chosen any Sherlock Holmes story, right, to begin with. There are stories that are more memorable than others, though all of them are sharp. This one has all of the elements, and there were some elements that we found interesting to begin with, and one of those elements was the description of the opium den in London, which is not something that we necessarily think when we think about Sherlock Holmes, right? Or Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who was such a gentleman. We'll talk about his biography in a minute, but so today we're going to talk about the short story, The Man with the Twisted Lip. Yeah.
What grabs the reader at the beginning is the unexpected, something we didn't see coming, the exotic, the opium. It's somebody who's recognized because of the feature of the twisted lip. So this is a person who's being encountered by a previous acquaintance, and suddenly in this dire dregs of human situation, the opium den. Right. And it has this, shares in common with the other body of Sherlock Holmes stories, this collision with maybe the exotic, the distasteful, the unexpected, which usually has an efflorescence in the culmination, you know, the flash of deduction at the end. But this one starts off right away.
I like what you say about the exotic, because it's like it's a taste for the exotic told with the most common sense 19th century tone. You know what I mean? So like there's a little bit of kind of risque elements of cultural, or even in terms of, you know, chemical use, drug addiction and whatnot, but the tone of the story is always told from a very gentlemanly place of,
certainly, of established values,
established boundaries, established values. Yeah.
the proud part of Britain and its empire.
Yeah, it's the end. It's like the end of empire, right? It's like right before Britain gets to right before it starts shrinking.
The apex of it. And right. When we're talking about, we'll get to Lost World, that one kind of a proto sci-fi work, which has an exotic, very exotic adventure. It's 1912, and I think 1912 when he wrote that work is
The Lost World.
Yeah, it's a kind
interesting because the story of the Man with the Twisted Lip takes place in I want to say 1880 something.
Yeah,
it's so that's like way later.
Well, 1880s, but the Lost World, that's 1912, the year of a great flagship, cruise ship of Great Britain, the Titanic, the Unsinkable, launches. And I think it's kind of, Holmes makes connections there. I find poetic and historic connections too.
You know, and it's also the year, not exactly the year, but it's close to the year of the publication of Heart of Darkness, you know, by Conrad.
Yeah.
I believe it might have been published in 1899. It'd be interesting to look up.
The same period, and it has the I think you have the characteristic of the optimistic characteristic of we see in Conan Doyle's biography, and that's why from the earliest.
I almost want to pose the idea. Sorry, Grady. That it is 1899. That with that, it's like the end of an era, right, and something else.
Because I think you could say that Conrad, instead of Conan Doyle, Conrad is already a tarnished view of empire, and particularly in the Congo, and things seen and heard in his travels. Already it's not a bright vision, of empire.
So while Conrad's vision, dark vision, is contemporary, right? Contemporary vision is dark, and in literature especially, right? His world is very exotic and sort of far away, right? But while Conan Doyle's vision is sort of classical or antiquated, right?
Yeah, it's all
Victorian, let's just say, right?
You can overnight in this marvelous country estate. You know, that imbues the pages of his books. We love that, and then when you have these flashes of the risque and the depraved, clearly.
But at the same time, if you maybe this is going to help us to jump straight into the story, is that London, Conan Doyle's London is utterly modern, and so we as people who live in the city, most of the world lives in cities now, right? Big cities. We can relate to the world that they present. Obviously, cities have changed, right? But they walk to the bank. There's gas lamps. Like the world of London was one of the first modern cities, if not the first modern city, right? So it's that I find that kind of very interesting, that while the attitudes were kind of, it didn't have that modern or much less postmodern idea of that negativity. It presents to us a life of the city in a way that is extremely recognizable, right? Extremely familiar to us. And that is something that brings me really, I love his description of the city, his descriptions of the city. And I think Borges really took a lot from him in that regard, and it'd be interesting to see exactly what, but those, I'd like to look at the descriptions of the city in a minute. Let's jump into the story, yeah?
Yeah, the story I do not have handy. I have.
Well, I do somewhere. Let me see. Well, okay, so I have you emailed it to me. Here we go. Wikisource, the man with the twisted lip. It's all, and all of it. The cool thing about Doyle's work is that it's also, you can access it for free online. There's no copyright anymore. So here's a version of it on Wikipedia, on Wikisource.
I have it. It's going to be on the link I sent you, right?
Yeah. So he starts with the description of the addiction, essentially, right?
Yes, that's the first part of it.
So Isa Whitney, right, was much addicted to opium. The habit grew upon him, as I understand, from some foolish freak when he was at college. So it's so interesting that he, begins with that, right? The habit grew upon him, as I understand, from some foolish freak when he was at college. As if you just, there's a kind of naivete there, right? But also that's how things happen, right? People become addicted, and he became addicted in college. And then it says, interestingly enough, and we had mentioned these, right, that from having read De Quincey's description of his dreams and sensations. So the idea is that this man Whitney, right, brother of the late Elias Whitney, principal of the Theological College of St. George's, so some guy who comes from a kind of bourgeois or learned family, right, becomes addicted to opium by a kind of freakish error from having read De Quincey's description of his dreams. I find that so interesting that he tried it, and then he got hooked to opium.
It sounds like he got hooked by reading, right? By reading De Quincey. It said from some foolish freak having read De Quincey's description of dreams and sensations. And I will say that that reminds me of my experience with the book called Under the Volcano, which is very much a dive into alcoholism, and it reaches hallucinogenic levels, and so
it reminds me of my experience with coffee. I tried it once, and now I'm still drinking it. 20 years later.
It remains with you,
right? So this poor guy gets hooked on it, but I think that brings us into a nice description. Well, Watson is a doctor, first of all, right? Dr. Watson. Second of all, there's a kind of simplicity to a lot of the statements that are obvious, but at the same time so truthful and wise. There's wisdom, like you had said about it.
Yeah, it strikes us with, you say, oh, that's so apt of life. It sounds true to us.
And you know, there's like a theme also to the story. Like I like to keep that in mind because Isa Whitney gets hooked on opium smoking from having read De Quincey's description of his dreams and sensations. So it's a literary kind of getting hooked on. And then later we will read about a man who gets hooked on.
Well, he gets
I mean,
hooked on a certain.
I'm just gonna say it. He gets hooked on begging.
Yes,
You know what I mean? So there's like a double, like he gets hooked on easy money. So, and maybe opium, getting hooked on opium is easy sort of wisdom of sorts, you know, a kind of easy, somebody said, be careful of unearned wisdom when they talking about acid or, you know, mushrooms and stuff like that.
Yeah, that is a case. Yeah, mystical experience in a few seconds or minutes, right?
I think it was Jung who said that. Be careful of unearned wisdom. All right.
There's
Yeah.
another facet to our person who becomes addicted to opium and then begging. Another facet is his vocation. He, I believe, is an actor. Is this?
He has no outlet for his vocation, so maybe for Whitney, the fact is that he has a traveler's vocation or an experimental kind of vocation, and you know, he decides to go into that.
Yeah, it has a place in the story insofar as I believe he affects certain expressions and even use of makeup to gain pity from the passersby and therefore be a more successful beggar.
So the story is really not about Isa Whitney. You know, Isa Whitney is kind of like the guy who leads us into the story that leads us into the main story. So Watson is it's June 89, okay, and then somebody rings on his bell, and it's late, right? And then it's Isa Whitney's wife, correct? Who's a friend of Watson's wife, right? And she's afraid because she's concerned and worried because her husband has disappeared. And then Watson, being that he's his doctor, right, says, well, you know, I'm going to go look for him. And they all know that he's got an addiction to opium. So then he goes to the opium den, right? Which the description is so interesting also, right? In London, right? He goes to the opium den in London, which is, you can see it as being a kind of very kind of outskirtsy kind of place. And he goes looking for Whitney, to send him to his wife. He has disappeared for, usually he disappears for a day, right? Where he goes to smoke. But this day, now he has disappeared for longer, like I want to say 48 hours or even more. And so he goes there looking for Whitney, right?
Here's
yeah.
Could I share this one passage about the arrival, so we can savor some of Conan Doyle's very effective and functional prose. There was no great difficulty in the first stage of my adventure. Upper Swamdham Lane is a vile alley, lurking behind the high wharves which line the north side of the river to the east of London Bridge. Between a slop shop and a gin shop, approached by a steep flight of steps leading down to a black gap like the mouth of a cave, I found the den of which I was in search. Ordering my cab to wait, I passed down the steps, worn hollow in the center by the ceaseless tread of drunken feet, and by the light of a flickering oil lamp above the door, I found the latch and made my way into a long, low room, thick and heavy with the brown opium smoke and terraced with wooden berths, like the forecastle of an immigrant ship.
Wow, nice prose. He doesn't shy away from music, you know?
No, he has a lot of music and uses very plain terms that are just so evocative, like drunken feet, I mean, a ceaseless tread of drunken feet. And
Right.
he gives us the brown opium smoke.
I think that's such a key detail, the fact that it's brown and not like gray, you
It's
know?
almost, it stains the atmosphere for us and takes us right there. And again, well, we're right off the bat, we're in a exotic and distasteful world, and kind of fascinating at the same time. Of course, who's to say that it's ugly and sordid does not have its fascination?
And you know, so he goes into this, and that's such a great passage to quote. And he goes into the den, right? And he walks in there through the gloom, right? He describes the bodies lying in strange, fantastic poses. That adjective, fantastic, right? They're fantastic, not as in amazing, but fantastic as in
Strange, weird,
phantasm-like, right?
yeah.
Strange-like, strange. It's such an interesting use of that adjective. And then he sees the man, right? He runs into the actual, well, but even before that, that little description of him entering there, right? Let me see if I can. And the way they talk, right? And you get a sense that he'd been there at some point. He must have, right? Or maybe he's just using his imagination, but who knows?
Well, I can quote something that's attributed. Sherlock Holmes said it, but now in posterity, it's attributed often to Conan Doyle himself. And for strange effects and extraordinary combinations, one must turn to life itself, which is so far more daring than any effort of imagination. And
but can I push that? Can I push back on that a little bit?
sure.
I think you're absolutely right. And I mean, I'm not saying that Conan was wrong, Conan Doyle, obviously, but there's also, and I think he proves it when he talks in the book in the novel that we both read, the one about the dinosaurs, the Lost World, you know, in that he'd never been to South America, I think, and he describes it. You know, he describes the jungle, and in some ways he's over the top and whatnot. But there's also something about not having been there that gives you a kind of ease and freedom. So maybe there's a kind of combination of both, right? Like,
Absolutely, of course. I really subscribe to the idea of traveling, writing about a place before you travel to it.
right.
That is it frees your imagination, and you pick other travelers' brain for what they know about it, and sometimes come up with a first draft, right? A first draft.
Right.
And,
You know, Edgar Allan Poe wrote The Murders of the Rue Morgue in Paris because he wanted it to be detached from the constraints of a city his readers would know, like Boston, say, or New York, you know?
You think about it, yeah, it gives it it dilutes the barrier of disbelief, right? We think Paris and right away, oh, it's a little more libertine society. And
Let me turn off the light. Just give me 1 second, Grady.
yeah. Another example from his first Conan Doyle's first published novel, *A Study in Scarlet*,
Right.
in that one, the second half of the book, suddenly you're transported to Utah in 1847.
Sure.
He uses the Mormons in this case.
Mm.
Certainly not a depiction that he would often use of wild and violent American characters, and that it was based on what materials he had at hand, and it was long before he would, as a famous author, beloved author,
Right.
write around the 1914, just about the eve of the First World War, a triumphant tour of the United States, where he, from the beginning, actually, the enthusiasm for Sherlock Holmes and the author outstripped that in other countries. Actually, he was better known in America first than in Britain. And
Right. And he wrote about the United States quite a bit. And the other story that we're going to talk about later, he talks about the KKK. You know,
yes,
the KKK makes an appearance in the Sherlock Holmes stories and the Sherlock Holmes story. And, you know, in this story, he talks about opium smoking. So like one of the things that I think, or one of the reasons why we chose this story to begin with, is the fact that it seems so modern in some ways. Like he's just like, we've all seen descriptions of, we've all read descriptions of, like, say, drug housing, right? We've all watched movies where they describe, where they show a kind of, you know, dirty alleyway or a kind of smoky motel room in some place where people are doing drugs and stuff. But I think in some way, Arthur Conan Doyle gives us the first, that might be a little daring to say the very first description, but I would, because he's one of the first writers who's writing about the modern world, the modern urban city, London.
Right? Where people need to find their escape of one means either through chemistry or through music or exercise.
Well, Sherlock Holmes himself does cocaine. You know,
interestingly, something I believe, when I'm thinking about the detective as an archetype,
yeah,
I believe that what the detective discovers and uncovers at the end is truly part of the detective. And Holmes, in his use of cocaine, for example, that's an example, mirror of that. In fact, I could state, I'm not really sure if Conan Doyle could have gone to or did go.
Well, he was a doctor, right? So
he might have prescribed it even.
Might have prescribed it, both cocaine. Well, I don't know about opiates. Well, yeah, for pain, right?
Yeah, and that also they're talking about laudanum and other 19th century lovely pharmaceuticals they had. But I would say I certainly would vow that Sherlock Holmes did go to an opium den. That's how alive.
I'm with you. But if he didn't go, then he did a heck of a job anyway, right?
Yes.
So going back to the actual description here, like if I can say a couple things here. One thing that caught my eye was when, or my ear actually, because it's very musical. I find this prose to be extremely musical. So he's talking about the people at the actual opium den, right? The most lay silent, but so muttered to themselves and others, talk together in a strange, low, monotonous voice, their conversation coming in gushes and then suddenly tailing off into silence, each mumbling out his own thoughts and paying little heed to the words of his neighbor. That kind of, it leaves you, the sentence is long, right, with a semicolon there. It leaves you a little bit kind of breathless, right? Each mumbling out his own thoughts and paying little heed to the words of his neighbor. Word heed, paying little heed. It's good prose.
Yeah, it's full. It's just it comes in waves and it rounds out with a fullness and certain not there's no,
Fullness of the smoke, right?
yeah. You choke on the smoke and yeah, there's a wonderful I would say a restrained music, and I'm sure that's what Borges, who I believe alleges his grandma first taught him to read in English.
Right.
You could imagine that this kind of restrained music had great appeal for him, recovering from the more florid siglo de oro de España,
Right.
español.
He probably, and you know, also on me as a kind of, well, as a non-native English speaker to read this, I sense a kind of tightness in the language that I really admire, you know, as opposed to the loose-ended Spanish language. But something I wanted to say something here also in terms of the, just going back to my point, you know, in terms of the modern stuff. So let me see if I can like put this into a coherent idea. Sherlock Holmes is in the writing about the city, right? Or stories that take, or I'm sorry, Conan Doyle is writing about stories. Is writing stories that take place in one of the first modern cities, London, in the late 19th century. And he's encountering situations and he's daring to open up situations that are very modern in their development, such as the opium den, right? And he's doing so with a language that is kind of modern, because it's not that, like, you know, it's, the language is very dynamic and it's not a heavy you know, 19th century language. It's something else, right?
Very active.
It's very active,
and
right.
even when it describes, it is full of
American.
Yeah, it is in a way,
right?
And it looks at things. He looks at things with his, I guess, the clinical eye comes in there.
The clinical eye, exactly.
Yeah, you transform that through the soul of a poet or a novelist, and you have. It takes us to that place, and
yet most of his attitudes never cease to be, or his outlook never ceases to be, like Victorian. I mean, an open-minded modern Victorian.
Yeah, it's open to what this modern city is, with its dens, its palaces and its dens of vice, you know, and everything in between. You know, the prim life of late 19th century England, and it's.
And when he says I took a cab there, well, he meant a cab, like a cab, you know, with horses,
with a whip, and yeah,
exactly.
But it's funny how the language cab is perfectly no problem, you know.
Right. He could have said I called an Uber, you know.
Yeah.
And then exactly. Okay, so he gets there and he like runs into Sherlock Holmes, right?
Yes. What on earth are you doing in this den?
What do you know, that's so interesting, because he would be like, I mean, we know from having read other stories that Sherlock Holmes has a little cocaine habit that he enjoys now and then, right?
Yes.
But he's not like consumed by drugs, you know. He's not a drug addict. I think
there was a 70s movie called The 2% Solution, and I think it did labor his addiction, and it took that strand of his character and exploited it for another Sherlock Holmes feature movie.
I think also we need to like understand that, like, it's not the same thing. Back then it was used prescribed by doctors, correct?
There'd be medications containing it, and
which, I mean, I'm sure he's using, I mean, he says it himself that he uses it for essentially for fun, right? So there's no doubt about that. But there's just like a different way of thinking about the drug, the way they viewed it, you know. But anyway, so like it's not completely out of the question that like, or maybe it is completely out of the question that Sherlock Holmes is there.
well,
For Watson.
certainly surprising, and it is another reflection on the core theme of the story, seeing the man with the twisted lip, and that's unexpected for the person who sees the man with the twisted lip.
Right.
And unexpected. Here's steady Dr. Watson, and he's running into Holmes, his great partner in excavating these crimes and bizarre mysteries.
Great partner in crime solving.
Yes.
And then Holmes tells him like, just send Whitney home. Whitney, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, just send Whitney home. He's already passed out, or he can't like run away because of his the state he's in. And then because I have a case that I'm working on and I'd like you to help me, right? And so Whitney, Watson talks to Whitney, right? And Whitney is completely useless, you know, he's completely kind of gone. And he doesn't even know he's been there for a couple of days. He thinks it's the same day. So Watson sends him home, and here's where the story begins. So like the story doesn't really take off as a story until like this point. You know, all the rest is a kind of very beautiful introduction.
Yes, and this is the feature of the writing, because look at this pivotal part, the breathtaking economy of expression. He just comes right in and says, you know, body may be limp, but send him home with a cab driver and a note for his wife.
And a note for his wife.
Yeah.
That's it.
So that's boom, like no exposition. It's just we'll figure out what Holmes knows first, you know, later.
And what does that do to you as a reader?
Well, I want to read on, of course. It suddenly turns the object after this wonderful, it turns out to be merely an introduction, as pleasant and intriguing as it is. It twists it in a whole new direction, which of course is like this carrot on the stick. The reader, I say, wow, this is happening. We're taking shuffling this character out, and what's the rest? What's going to happen next?
Right, and so there's like a kind of there's a whole description of the opium den that takes its time, and it's rather luxurious, right? Yeah. And then when the actual action comes in, it's not choppy, but it's just, let's get to it.
Yeah.
That's a really good point.
Yeah, and it spawns the whole mystery, of course. I can't wait. What's Holmes gonna explain to Dr. Watson at the end as he briefly dazzles us.
And then let's see. So what's he doing there? He's trying to solve a case of this St. Clair dude, right? Who his wife, it gets a little bit complex here because, okay, so Holmes is there because, you correct me if I'm wrong, like the details of how the case works, right? Like, there's this guy named, his last name is St. Clair, right? Who his wife saw one day when she was walking around there, for some reason she found herself in that unseemly neighborhood, right? And then she kind of saw him, and she was walking down the street, and then he was up she saw him up in the window, right? And then he was brought in, yanked in, right? And then he disappeared. And then there was some blood, like they went up to that room and they found some blood there. But that comes later, right? So at this point, they're just kind of like walking around and trying to solve the case.
Yeah, it's a typical kind of digression about Saint Clair.
Neville, right? Which is almost like your dog's name, Deville.
Yes, Mr. Neville, yes, very similar. They rhyme, Neville and Deville, and he is known as Cecil B. DeMiller,
DeMiller.
Other things, and I've been thinking of him as making him into how he would make a good little detective, sniffing around Hollywood. Which is, I've often thought that'd be really interesting if he started sniffing under a car one day, and I looked under there and I found some coagulated blood and finger wedged in the mud under the bumper or something. Anyways, that's that's the start of some mystery.
He'll make it into your fiction, and he'll work with Detective Santana, who's your creation, right?
Who's interesting. You've certainly championed me to get going with more Santana, and it's
our viewers should know that Graydon got a story published in none other than the magazine, and the name, don't tell me, Ellery Queen, right?
Kind of you mentioned, yeah.
And also, you have in Havana Brotherhood. There's a couple detective stories. So you dabbled in the art of detective writing, and also you have another creation, which is the Detective Santana, who is it has not seen the light of day yet in terms of publishing, but it is something that I think your readers will love, because it takes place in Hollywood, and he's quite an interesting older guy of a detective. And anyway, I just wanted to mention that.
No, and thank you. You're so key to that, because in the Havana Brotherhood, the first Santana story appeared, and that came from the 2000s is when I wrote that, and it would be, the second story has yet to come. It's been a long gap.
So Borges said, Grady, that everybody who writes detective stories is always rewriting Sherlock Holmes, and there's some truth to that.
I feel
Sherlock Holmes is a kind of, for example, here in this particular case, he doesn't tell Watson right away what they're going to solve, right? He's just like, come with me, we're going to solve this thing. And Watson says, but I don't know anything about it. He's like, okay, that's better, you will. So he's not somebody who's like, who divulges details about a situation, outright.
Yeah, that here it creates a wonderful kind of suspense.
How is Santana, your detective that I love so much and that people haven't read yet, but they will? How is he different from the archetype of Sherlock Holmes?
Well, one thing about Tony is I feel that he's just always an eyelash. He's part morally. He's an eyelash from criminal himself.
Isn't that the great quality of most most great detectives, right?
He has but he certainly has he still has a moral compass, isn't it? That's like,
But maybe his moral compass is sharper because he has put it to use in difficult situations, in morally gray situations. So his moral compass has to be sharper. You know what I mean?
and something about Tony is it's a big contrast, of course, with Sherlock Holmes, because Sherlock, in that first story, he kind of puts it all together at the end when the mystery is revealed, and but in general, he doesn't hide like these secret nuggets of arcane knowledge. He harbors more secrets of human nature.
But he's a little bit of a curmudgeon, right? Very much of a curmudgeon.
Yeah, he's not in the sense that cantankerous and opinionated when it comes to a world he's living in, which is
and given to fits of rage, no?
Yeah, I would say, yeah, about what his body could use, what he used to be able to do,
right,
and what he can't do anymore with his legs or his muscles, and but he is a somebody who just he's living in a changing world, a rapidly changing world, and a global world, I may say, and that he has the advantage of one thing: he's older than I am by about a generation,
and he's older than Sherlock Holmes, who is living in a changing world, but also he's living in London, in a world that is very much itself, It's not, Tony Santana is like a Mexican-American guy in LA.
Yeah, and he grew up in East LA, and he goes to whatever country he feels more comfortable in at different stages of his life.
Right.
And
so let's go back to, I just wanted to make that kind of digression because why not, right?
It's a welcome one, yeah. And okay. We're getting back to the denouement here, the man with the twisted mouth.
Yeah.
Follow the Holmes tradition.
Exactly. So, Holmes knows some details about Neville, who has disappeared. And here are some of the details. Monday, very shortly after his departure, to the effect that a small parcel of considerable value, which she had been expecting, was waiting for her at the offices of the Aberdeen Shipping Company, his wife, I think. Now, if you are well up in your London, you will know that the office of the company is in Fresno Street, with branches out of Upper Swandon Lane, where you found me tonight, the opium den, right? Mrs. Sinclair had her lunch, started for the city, did some shopping, proceeded to the company's office, got her packet, and found herself exactly at 4:35 walking through Swandam Lane on her way back to the station. And there she saw her husband, right? And she thought that maybe he got kidnapped or somebody murdered him or something. And so, but when she saw him at the window, right? But when she rushed up, the guy was no longer there. Later, the cops were called, right? And they found, let me see if I can find the actual thing so I can read it a little bit. So the rooms were carefully examined and results all pointed to the abominable crime. The front room was plainly furnished as a sitting room and led into a small bedroom which looked out upon the bank of one of the wharves. Between the wharf and the bedroom window is a narrow strip which is dry at low tide but is covered at high tide. Anyhow, they didn't find Mr. Neville St. Clair, but they found like his garments, right?
Yes.
Boots, socks, hat, his watch, all were there. But he wasn't. Okay. So the wife obviously thinks like, oh, he's been murdered or something, right?
Yeah, she's thinking the worst, as people will do when they call the police or the detective.
In fact, doesn't she like faint at some point?
I believe so, or at
Right.
least swoon. People tend to swoon in the 1880s.
Particularly women tend to faint more than men, right? In the popular imagination of the time.
Yeah, and it seems like they did it often, so often then that I cannot recall in my life. But I bet it's happened in a few, perhaps
Have
Mexican.
anybody ever faint out of from bad news or from stress or something? I don't.
Yeah, I haven't witnessed that happening, but it was definitely a epidemic apparently from 19th century art and novels.
Right. But he's still. But you know, why not, right? I mean, it's plausible that one could faint, a man or woman.
Oh yeah,
You know, it's not like completely.
being overcome by something.
Right. All right.
Or being hit by a sap on the back of your skull.
Oh, here it is. Mrs. St. Clair had fainted at the sight of the blood upon the window, and she was escorted home by a cab by the police. In a cab by the police. So she fainted at the sight of blood upon the window. All right. What do we know about the other guy, Grady? The actual guy with the twisted lip.
We know that he has a twisted lip and that he
has a shock of orange hair, right?
This is okay. A shock of orange hair.
A pale face disfigured by a horrible scar.
Well, in this case, I believe we're looking at his use of his actor's use of makeup, even though we're surprised by what we see. But I believe,
but the scar itself goes from the top of his eye. It's like a wheel, right? From his eyebrow down his cheek to the edge of his mouth, and it curves. It's the lip up, the guy's lip up. But what, like prior to the solving of the crime, how is the beggar worked into the story? Oh, because he lives on the second floor, right? Exactly, or near where, okay. The beggar,
where his clothes were found, right?
Whose name is Hugh Boone, right? Hugh Boone. These names are so interesting for me too. What a gift, for the naming.
Yeah, we can. I know. I heard one of Conan Doyle's favorite authors at the time was the American Bret Harte, who definitely roamed California and very much like a contemporary of Bret Harte, Western American kind of writer, also around the time of Mark Twain. So,
did you know that he went to school with Robert Louis Stevenson?
Yeah, and another author. Was this in Scotland where they were educated?
I think so.
Yeah, Edinburgh, and
he was born there.
Another three. This is like a three of great significance because you have Arthur Conan Doyle, and you have Robert Louis Stevenson, who's another.
We will talk about him, I think.
He's a person who creates these exquisite nightmares that haunt our imagination to this day. Jekyll and Hyde. I mean, that's right. And the other ones,
and a lot of scary stories and horror.
He had the full range and very modulated again, and just this wonderful. I think he had some Scottish background as well as
Right.
Conan Doyle. Conan Doyle actually they were Catholic Irish, but they end up in Scotland, and that's where he was born in Scotland.
He was
His
born in Scotland. He was,
parents were Catholic.
and both his parents were artists. And we can talk about his bio in a little bit, but like,
I want to mention the third author of note that met in this Edinburgh University, John Barry, author of Peter Pan,
wow.
and a lot of others.
So they're all three authors are kind of contemporaries and going to school at the same time.
Yeah, and they all, it almost seems indelible on the soul of the reader, indelible.
Wow, amazing. Maybe there was something in the air, something
Yeah.
in the water, right? In Edinburgh.
Definitely, they mixed a lot of things. It was, a conjuring. It was of fantasy, of horror, of mystery,
Right.
and the reader that Conan Doyle cares about so much, and even playfully refers to in passages of the Lost World. My dear reader, and at one point he exclaims, "My reader, if I have one."
Well, at least he doesn't call him my hypocrite lecture, like Baudelaire.
Oh, lector hypocrite.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Or like, what is it, Don Quixote? My what is it, my lazy reader, my desocupado, or something like that, right?
That's a wonderful way to
How
put it.
would you translate desocupado?
My oh
Unoccupied.
my idol, lazy dreamer. Yeah.
Nowadays they would say my chill writer, or my chill reader, or something, right?
Yeah. My
laid back reader.
My marijuanated reader. I walk through my neighborhood in Hollywood sometimes. The mephitic clouds come out of the windows.
You don't need to go to any particular smoking houses anymore, right?
Yeah, I just walking down the street. It's good. It's almost as good as going to a den.
there you go. Okay.
Let's get to the.
Let's walk.
I'm on the edge of my seat, literally, because I'm almost like as excited to hear about how this ends as the first time I read it.
Yeah, and so like, all right, how does it end? So, but before we go to the end, they find, so just kind of like to clarify, his wife is walking down the street near the opium den in a bad neighborhood in London. She thinks she sees her husband on the second floor of a building above the den. Then somebody yanks their husband in, and maybe she correct me, am I making this up? She hears a shriek or somebody yelling or something, or maybe she sees.
I know there was a kind of distraction, but the minute that he's spirited away, that's for sure.
Right. And then she goes there. She calls the cops. She goes there, and they find his clothes, but they don't find her husband, who's a well-respected man with a lot of money in his bank account. Okay.
Yeah.
And then like she thinks he's dead. Right. She faints. They have to bring her back home. Okay. Then there's a homeless man who lives in the same building. It's probably that room where they saw him, right? I guess if he's homeless, why would he's not homeless in that way. He's a beggar, right? But he has a home.
Yes.
And his name is Boone, right? Mr. Boone.
I think we're in the neighborhood of a double life.
Exactly. So, but how does Holmes get to that, right? So okay, they find there's a little kind of river, not a river, but like the kind of how do you call it? A waterway there, right? And they find a jacket full of half pennies, 421 pennies, 270, 421 pennies, 270 half pennies, right? But there's no body there. So
Yeah.
they take Boone to they find Boone, right?
Yeah.
And who's this beggar who everybody knows because he's very talkative and kind of like quick-witted, right?
Yeah. So he's definitely a known character.
And they bring him into the police station. Okay. While all of this is happening, Holmes and Watson go to like Mrs. St. Clair's house, correct?
That is, yeah, I just know that they are, they have discovered his secret vocation, which is begging.
Yeah, but okay, but before we get to that, Grady,
Yeah.
can I read you a paragraph of when they go to her house, because it's another one. It's another of those descriptions that like of London that he does so well that influenced Borges in his own writing, right? So they go to see Mrs. St. Clair, right? And he says, "We had pulled up in front of a large villa which stood within its own grounds. A stable boy had run out to the horse's head, and springing down, I followed Holmes up the small, winding gravel drive which led to the house. As we approached, the door flew open, and a little blonde woman stood in the opening, clad in some sort of light mousseline, this, I don't know, soie. I'm mispronouncing that certainly, with a touch of fluffy pink chiffon at her neck and wrists." So there's like a description of the. Here's the thing.
The woman, yeah.
There's a description of the woman, but that is followed by a description of the drive. You know what I mean? Like a description of the outside, and then like a very pointed description of the person. I find that to be almost cinematic, right?
Yeah, you can completely picture it. And she stood figure outlined against the flood of light, one hand upon the door, one half raised in her eagerness, her body slightly bent, her head and face protruded, with eager eyes and parted lips, a standing question. Wow, that's kind of, yeah, a standing question. That's beautiful.
Right. And then she tells Holmes that she has a question for him. She's like, "I just have one question for you."
Yeah, thinking the worst.
Yeah. Is he dead? Right?
That's it.
And then Holmes thinks about it for a second, and he's a straight shooter, right? And then he says, "Yes, I think he's dead." "When did he die?" And then he gives her a date, right? And then she says, "But I just got a letter from him. How could he be dead?" And that kind of sends Sherlock Holmes into a tailspin. Right?
Yeah, he's definitely going to be unnerved by that revelation.
Right. So he doesn't sleep for like a day, right? Well, they and this is also like an interesting cultural thing. Watson and Sherlock Holmes sleep over at her house.
Oh, why is that? Do you think just to?
I mean, if you had a detective come over, you wouldn't say like, "Hey, like just sleep over."
No, it seems it's odd today. You know, you would not invite Mr. Colombo or Jack Reacher to stay overnight. Yeah. So that's is it partly to gather more intelligence?
Right, and also because I think she lives in the countryside,
That's
right?
what it is. Yeah.
Right, and also they don't have time to go back to Holmes's flat on Baker Street, right? And so and Watson goes to bed, and it's so. I just think of like Watson's his wife, you know, he just like went to like run an errand for her, or I mean, it was a
Yeah,
difficult errand.
what's she thinking?
Yeah, but there's like, imagine there's like no cell phones at this time. He's just like, I'm gonna sleep over. He just like sleeps over, you know.
He's little thought has been given to her, which is kind of reflective of the thinking or the opaqueness of that period's vision, and maybe to a certain extent, it's prolonged till very recently, right?
Well, now we have cell phones with like you know, text messages and iWatches and whatnot, you know.
Tells us actually with this incredible guilt of making it so hard to get lost.
Right. Exactly.
You want to get lost,
Mm.
and then it makes us like morally flawed if we neglect to tell somebody, this is where I am. This is where I'm going.
But it's almost like the culture forces you to be that way, you know.
Yeah.
And also something that is interesting pointing out is the strength of the friendship between Watson and Sherlock Holmes, where Sherlock Holmes says like he catches him at an opium den, and then he's like, I'm working on a case, come with me. And then that's it. He goes for like 48 hours or 24 hours or whatever, however long.
Yeah.
Like, doesn't he have like patience to see, you know?
What was that you said?
Doesn't Watson have patience to see?
Patience is, well,
and a wife to, you know, be with.
You definitely hit the nerve on that area called plausibles.
Mm.
Plausibles. Oh, and you got to score. You definitely score one.
But here's the thing, also, Grady. I think it has to do with it being plausible, but also like it speaks to a different kind of timing of living back then, you know, and also to the importance that male friendship had at the time. Like it's almost like the friendship between Watson and Sherlock Holmes is the ideal of the male friendship of the 19th century.
Yeah, and it's ideal of perhaps loyalty mingled with service and to each other, and kind of an obtuse, sort of obtuse vision too, because I think rightly we worry about now what did Mrs. Watson think.
Right, right.
General,
right?
Was the world more responsive? Very, very possible, and in fact, you see it in the biography of Conan Doyle. Definitely, war breaks out wherever it was. He volunteered every time, and,
right.
and heaven knows.
And sometimes even if he was older, they wouldn't take him, but he tried to raise his own army.
He was a little, pudgy, and he
very much like a walrus. They said.
Went as a volunteer in the Boer War, I believe. They depicted it as he went to fight against microbes. So
he went to Alaska, and he's such an interesting character in how he used his medical degree and his writing skills like one. Like there's a long history of doctors in literature.
Certainly.
And Chekhov was a doctor. Bulgakov was a doctor.
Oh, that's new to me. I didn't know that.
Yeah, Bulgakov, author of Master Margarita, was a doctor. He even wrote about it. But he left medicine for writing. When the Russian Revolution happened, 1917 or something, around that time, he left medicine.
you, the doctor definitely, from medical school, that's where Conan Doyle, we must excuse these poor dogs.
Well, let's walk the thing.
What Holmes has and shares with Watson both, they have the diagnostician's eye, right? To be able to size up and base it's on the evidence, on these facts, what is the underlying condition? What is the truth? What is the truth? And
and his use of logic also, that's key, because he solves his cases through logic.
yeah, that's his bulwark. Yeah,
right. That's like Sherlock Holmes's kind of strength, forte. And Conan Doyle had gone to medical school, and he had met a doctor who was very much like a logical person, right? And used it to figure out stuff. And
it was his Professor Bell, his name was.
Exactly. And there's a photo of him in the bio.
The photo, it definitely has that stark, hawk-like profile of, you see it in his physiognomy of
Right.
Professor Bell. And
It's almost like being so logical gives you a kind of stern, sharp look, right?
And interestingly, it was Robert Louis Stevenson from Samoa posted to Conan Doyle, that's certainly your detective has a strong resemblance with our old dear Professor Bell.
Oh, I didn't know. Is that in the bio?
Yes, yeah.
Wow. Okay, great. And wow, that's such a good detail.
Yeah.
That he would use that. And I have heard it said from my students actually at LACC that they feel that because Doyle lost his father in a way early on to alcoholism, right? And
yes, it was worsening alcoholism.
Worsening, and when he came back from university, I think, or was it high school?
He died.
He had to commit his own father.
Yeah.
Which must have been really tough, right?
Yeah, he went to an asylum.
Right, but it was a long suffering thing, right? Which kind of, and he doesn't really. I guess what I'm trying to get at is that there's a kind of lack there for a kind of role model to look up to, right?
Yeah.
And some of my students have argued that like they think Sherlock Holmes is a kind of role model for Watson.
It may be so, because
kind of paternal figure.
Yeah, Watson seems very much very close to Conan Doyle, and Holmes is
close to the professor.
Yeah, he's that
professor,
distant, that separate figure, and that he respects and looks up to, and is kind of unapproachable too.
Because he's so much smarter too,
Yeah, he's fast. He's like a computer, almost human computer.
Yeah, perhaps he would be considered borderline. What is it, Asperger's, something like that nowadays. In our era of labeling.
Yeah, and we do. It is indeed an era of labels, and what do you do in an era of labels when I feel like all of human being by nature, we are all kind of just on different drafts of our life.
And moody, we're extremely moody. Well, not, I mean, as a species, right?
Yeah, so. And it's happening today. I think the opium den, where the people mumble but they don't pay any attention or cannot.
fantastic figures.
They're separated, and I feel like certainly at the current moment, people wear with earbuds and listening to a different audio reality are, you know, it's a further notion of that. We need to, it calls for a compassion too, and a lot of heart to realize that people are separated by other realities. It may also create mishaps if you cross in front of a speeding train, perhaps, and fail to hear you're listening to some really heavy metal or something, and miss.
And then you're gonna be really close to some heavy metal, right?
Yeah, you under it.
So hopefully not. But okay, then let's go to the end of the story. Then they sleep over, right? And Watson goes to bed. I don't know what his wife is doing, but we've already talked about that, right? Or thinking. And then Sherlock Holmes does something weird, and we can have a whole talk on like the moods of Sherlock Holmes, right? That's an interesting one.
Yes.
But like, she doesn't go to, I mean, Sherlock Holmes doesn't go to bed, right? He gathers a lot of pillows from around the household. Mm.
Is this his form of propping himself up?
Yeah, and he gets a little kind of tobacco, right? Shag, is that how you call it?
Oh, is it like snuff for me? Or
No, like to smoke. Let me see if I can
smoke. Yeah, is it? Yeah, shredded tobacco.
shred. Let me see if I can find it here. This is prior. So okay. He took off his coat and waistcoat and put on a large blue dressing gown, and then wandered about the room collecting pillows from his bed and cushions from the sofa and armchairs. With these, he constructed a sort of Eastern divan. Is that how you say it, divan?
Yes.
Divan, right? Like a kind of area.
Yeah, it's like one of those Cleopatra couches. That's
okay.
Yeah.
And an Eastern one. So like he's thinking like he would like almost like in a kind of yogi like position, right?
Yeah.
Upon which he perched himself cross-legged with an ounce of shag tobacco and a box of matches laid out in front of him. In the dim light of the lamp, and this is kind of a little bit mirroring the kind of the opium den thing, right?
Yes.
So could he be saying that? Well, let me read the paragraph and then make like an argument, right? So with this, he constructed a sort of Eastern divan upon which he perched himself cross-legged with an ounce of shag tobacco and a box of matches laid out in front of him. In the dim light of the lamp, I saw him sitting there, an old briar pipe between his lips, his eyes fixed vacantly upon the corner of the ceiling, the blue smoke curling up from him, silent, motionless, with the light shining upon his strong set aquiline features. So he sat as I dropped off to sleep. So he sat when a sudden ejaculation caused me to wake up, and I found the summer sun shining into the apartment.
Wow, what a description, and
right,
and definitely it sets the that perhaps his Holmes is definitely, when one should be ready to go to sleep, it's not indicated to start smoking tobacco,
right?
It's an excitation.
And he doesn't ask, and like Mrs. St. Clair, like, hey, can I smoke in your house? Right?
Yeah, even though in those jolly old times, or not so jolly, depending where you were in the class hierarchy.
But that's always the case, isn't it?
Yeah, but I'm sure their hostess was only too happy to light the gentleman's cigars, and but clearly he's it sounds like an insomniac. I find that often kind of a misleading word, because if you find something to occupy yourself, as Dear Holmes must, either with his brain or the mystery he's struggling with, or simply his addictions, he's entertaining himself. So if you're entertained,
well, he's thinking, right? But he's not. I think he's not. You know, he's thinking with the back of his head, right?
yeah, he's got to put
He was
himself
subconscious or something like that.
in it. Yeah.
Um,
Oh my gosh. And
but in that Eastern-like thing, right? So you
yeah,
picture him like a yogi, just smoking and
it evokes, certainly, somewhere in the Orient, or in Turkey, or
exactly
it's very there's some Orientalism here.
some Orientalism. Yeah, I wonder what's the name?
Said,
Oscar Said would have said about this. I'm sure he would have had a thing or two to say, but we're not reading Said, right? We're reading Conan Doyle today. So
and we well, I'm excited about the ending as you are, and maybe
yeah. And then he comes up, he thinks all night, and then but the point here that I was trying to make is that there's a kind of how do you call it?
Oh my gosh, I just realized something too. The whole paragraph, it ends with the room was full of a dense tobacco haze, but nothing remained of the heap of shag which I had seen upon the previous night.
And also, Grady, if I can add to that, let me add something to that, because there's something really cool there. But I think it was previous night. Then dress, no one is steering yet, but I know. Hold on a second. Oh, then dress, no one is steering yet, but I know where the stable boy sleeps, and we shall soon have the trap out. He chuckled to himself as he spoke. His eyes twinkled, and he seemed a different man to the somber thinker of the previous night. Okay.
Well, maybe he got a little dash of cocaine for breakfast.
Cocaine puffs or something, right?
I'm really astounded at kind of the independence of Holmes as a character.
Yeah.
He's clearly is so joined by friendship with Watson and their criminal crusades, but equally he's independent, solitary.
Right. He's got his own method, right?
Yeah, and in some sense unapproachable.
But Grady, you see, there's a parallel between the beginning of the story and the opium eaters, the opium smokers, and Sherlock Holmes at the end while he's thinking about the case. So you can argue that
that he's lulling himself into kind of the smoke, the putting himself in that place again.
Well, and we go to the beginning quote of like, be careful of unearned wisdom, right? Yeah. So a drug eater, to use the Times terminology, an opium eater would be trying to earn wisdom that he has not earned, right? Through chemical exposure, right? But Sherlock Holmes is getting to a place of extreme of wisdom through having traveled a road. You know what I mean? So there's a kind of argument there.
It's a lucid
meditation, maybe.
Yeah, it's a lucid pipe dream, and definitely, and well, he's earned it. Why? His powers.
He's an edgy character. He's not just some goody two shoes,
Yeah, not like I say, he's got hard edges, and there's something icy about him, and a little cold. But the love and familiarity of readers is with him.
He's in
And,
touch with the dark side for sure, with the edge. You know?
Yeah.
All right, and then they figure it out, right? He figures it out. They go to the jail, and he knows the detectives there, and they let him in. And what's the name of the beggar? He's sleeping, right?
yeah, it's Neville Sinclair.
Right. So then they say he hasn't washed himself, right? He's like stinky and dirty.
Dirty with the grime covering his face, repulsive ugliness.
Yeah, and so then they bring a sponge into the cell, right?
Yes, and miraculously rubbing the moist sponge across the prisoner's face, he says, "Let me introduce you," he shouted, "to Mr. Neville St. Clair of Leith in the county of Kent." And
So Neville St. Clair was indeed Boone also, or Boone was St. Clair. The beggar and St. Clair were the same, one and the same.
yes, they're one of the same kind. And it's the man who has found his unearned lucre
Mm.
and living begging.
And he like
Presents
cannot be arrested for having killed Sinclair because Sinclair didn't die.
yeah,
We have no case against him.
yeah, this is a murder without a body. It's a murder of a mask. And
But he's afraid that they're gonna out him,
expose him. And this is a case, for example, Tony Santana. This is the kind of moment where Tony might say, "Mr. Boone, I can keep this quiet for you if you like."
Oh wow!
But those are
Right.
anyhow.
So Tony's harder edged than Sherlock Holmes.
I wouldn't say that. He's a survivor. But also, and survival becomes harder as the world changes. So he's having to find he will always be finding new tricks, put it
How
that
old is he?
When Tony started out, he was like about 58. Now the years have gone by. He's 70.
Wow. So it might be harder for him. So he's surviving. So he might ask to, what's the word? He might ask for a bite, to use Mexican slang, una mordida. Right?
Oh yeah. If he was a cop,
right.
And la mordida. Yeah.
Exaction. What's the word?
It's it's a little tip, a little tip for so that the traffic cop goes away, for example.
Right. But Sherlock Holmes doesn't ask for that, right? What he does is he gives Neville Sinclair a chance to earn his pardon, because the cops can either out him, right, or as a beggar, as that famous beggar Booner, or
maybe a chance to live up to his best self.
Exactly. And so he tells them how he got there, right?
Yeah.
He was a journalist.
And from journalist
who did a story on homeless people, right? On beggars, rather.
And being in the life situation, what is it he discovered?
That he made more money begging through his charms and through his kind of brightness, right?
his actorly traits.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, and with his makeup and his curl lip and his everything, right?
Yes.
And then he happened to come upon somebody. He signed it. He signed as a kind of, how do you call it? He signed some papers for a friend so that he would be a co-signer of a thing, of a loan, and the friend I forget exactly. The friend disappeared, and then he was, well, the point is that that he had a huge amount of money to pay, right? And he couldn't come up with it, and he thought, well, I remember when I did the story, and so he went and he did, and he paid off his loan, or whatever loan that he owed.
That's it. He had that trick. It was the trick up his sleeve.
And then he said it was really hard to just go back to work when and make not much money, where I could just beg and make a lot of money.
And he'd found something that even though often it can sound preposterous, but to this very day, there are plenty of people who would like to believe that you can make a heck of a good earning as begging. Now, I tend to think that's quite a sordid and sad, a sad place to be among the possibilities before us humans. But
right, like we like to earn our stuff, right? Like
there's joy, yeah.
Right, but it's plausible that somebody could, given the right gifts, earn. Not plausible necessarily, but it's not totally unlikely or impossible.
Yeah, it certainly has happened.
So it has happened in the story, for sure.
Yeah, at least the best thing is it's wonderful. It's in the perfect place. It is in the realm of mystery, and it is in the realm of the tribunal of fiction.
And so he comes clean, right? And the policeman just, I think they're not gonna. They say, if we ever find you begging again, we're gonna tell everybody, right?
And there's a little bit of gallantry there too, so that his wife will hopefully never find out.
Exactly. And he gets to go home without it, and the curl lip gets tossed.
Still still in this world of London, and right at the kind of before the apex of the empire, and it ends in a chivalrous and gentlemanly fashion.
Well, but also in a kind of witty fashion, because then at the very end, the last sentence, the policeman, Bradstreet, asks him, like, how did you reach your conclusion, right? And Holmes says, I reached this one by sitting upon 5 pillows and consuming an ounce of shag.
That's it.
I think, Watson, that if we drive to Baker Street, we shall just be in time for breakfast. Kind of deadpan, a little bit, and predicting a little bit of the 1950s American, how do you call it?
The patter of
noir, film noir or something,
Definitely. It's very rooted in reality. So, and you do see those. Conan Doyle definitely. He gives us a very specific date. His description of the kinds of stores and the streets and precise locations it's encyclopedic and never boring.
Never boring, because they're always different, and I think we enjoy the patterns,
Oh yeah, and I'm sure he's utterly faithful. He knew this milieu so millimetrically. It's they don't in no way do they strike you as excess. They just they sing by.
And you know what doesn't strike you as excess either? The goodness of the characters, like the solid morals that get put forth. are not like caricaturesque, like a kind of, you know, Superman kind of thing, you know. They're actually mm, perhaps idealized, but not over the top.
Yeah, they're ideal. It's by an atom, really, because doubtless Conan Doyle and Sherlock Holmes, they will go to the dark side.
Right.
I will say in the sum total of there's always just that extra atom. It's just one more atom of goodness, you know, of ethic and good heart.
I think so.
And I would say we certainly see it. There's kind of a mirror of the life and character of Conan Doyle, and
I think, you know, so if you don't mind, I would like to talk more about another one of his stories next time we meet.
I'm looking for.
Let's do, you know, let's do 2 or 3 Conan Doyle stories, and then we can do the novel, you know, The Lost World, and then we'll jump into somebody else,
Yeah,
another author.
yeah. Another really interesting one could be the Red-Headed League too.
Red-Headed League, and the Red-Headed League is possibly the most famous one, right?
Yeah, well, you touched on, yeah, that is the one that brings in
KKK comes up.
KKK. Yes,
That I love that. It's the 5 orange peeps, right?
so we got a good bunch to look forward to.
And then you said the Adventure of the Speckled Band, and there's a couple other ones.
Yeah, and
There's one that I love where Sherlock Holmes like goes to like a classical music concert right in the middle of an investigation because he wants to like kill time. So I'm gonna look for that one, but I think it's just getting started in terms of Sherlock Holmes. But also, I'd like to tell people who are watching either here or through a different channel that if we're literature lovers and writers and teachers, so if you want us to hear us talk about a book in the future that mostly classics, I think that's our. I mean, you know, we'll do some contemporary stuff too, but mostly, you know, let us know, and then we'll look into it. Maybe we'll talk about it. Yeah.
yeah, please, you will be you who are seeing us a part of this, and
Yeah, we want people to just kind of read with us, you know, and talk about and comment and get into books, because that's where
yeah, and we bring these up like Adventures of Sherlock Holmes now, and it seems like every good book leads to 2 or 3 more good books.
You know, talking about that, Brady, he mentions what the story that is mentioned at first, right? That influences the first guy who gets into drugs, right? Which, by the way, we don't hear about him. De Quincey's description of his dreams and sensations.
Yes.
That would be something. It's Confessions of an English Opium Eater. That's what it is. That's the book. It's an autobiographical account by De Quincey about his addiction.
And now you got me intrigued, because this is one of those categories of books. We have books that we were supposed to have read, books that we really read with gusto, and then there's that whole list of others that are in the limbo of their notorious excellence, and that's the case of Opium Eater. I know it's one of those with very rich prose and I believe descriptions of incredible hallucinogens. Is you, my fellow imbiber of caffeine, and will know that nobody's written about the horrible hallucinations with coffee, but
But it does happen, right?
Uh,
Coffee can be
the
a stimulant of quite potent thrust.
it changes behavior, and I think actually, it depends on the sensitivity of the people. For sure, I think you could get somebody ultra sensitive, and they could go nuts with ginger ale.
Sugar, right?
And yeah, and somebody else, some hardened case, who knows, give them
Mm.
Red Bull, and they can play a Stradivarius,
There you go.
Debussy on the Stradivarius.
But you're right about that. Any book or most books lead into other books, like a domino effect. So I think it would be very easy to go from Conan Doyle to Stevenson, right? The Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, or
Yeah.
or back to Edgar Allan Poe, which will lead us to Baudelaire, which leads us to T.S. Eliot. So it's just like a kind of a matrix of a web of connections that's there.
And yeah, that's a fine circle too. T.S. Eliot, an American in England.
And you know what he said about Baudelaire? And he's got it. He wrote it on the cover of the. Not he didn't wrote it on the cover, but they quoted him on the back of Baudelaire's collected poems in English. Let me see if I can get it here. Oh no, this is not Baudelaire. This is Dostoevsky's Notes from the Underground.
The Underground, yes.
Yeah, but he said T.S. Eliot said about Baudelaire that he was the first poet to bring the modern city or the modern expression into fruition or into the open. I'm paraphrasing here. And then we're all indebted to him because he was the first modern speaker in literature. There's something to that Baudelaire got it from Poe, whom he read in translation.
That's what.
And then there's another line that leads us to Conan Doyle that leads us to Borges and so on. It's like different
ramifications,
branches,
And I want to just another part of relation of author. There's Conan Doyle, another part of the inheritors of Conan Doyle. There's a Anglo Canadian writer named John Buchan, and his stock and trade too very much foreigners or violent powers that want to bring evil upon the empire. And Buchan leads us to a filmmaker too, which is this filmmaker is Hitchcock, because he adapted famously The Man Who Knew Too Much. He also 39 Steps. 39.
What about Orson Welles, right? And The Third Man. I mean, there's something there.
Yeah, that is. There's another inheritor of. I would say definitely the political and suspense mantle of Conrad, which takes us down to Graham Greene, who he's a British. I've often called him. He's like the passionate Englishman. It travels the world, and it seemed like every country he landed in, he had a nose for crises and trouble, and he brought a book out of it almost with clockwork. And he's of course the screenwriter for Third Man.
Right.
Orson Welles, on the other hand, is the actor who vividly brings the ambivalent Harry Lime to life, and who interesting kind of Sherlock Holmes parallel. We know that Harry Lime in the movie Third Man doesn't have a good ending, but the public loved him so much that it led to a lengthy radio serial, The Adventures of Harry Lime.
Well, it's so interesting that you talk about that, because Doyle didn't think much of Sherlock Holmes as a literary creation, I think, and he thought these historical novels were going to be his go-to thing, or his claim to literary immortality, but it was Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah, indeed.
Whom he killed. And you're right, people they were picketing outside of his house, like demanding that he bring Sherlock Holmes back.
His own mother wrote him and said, "Don't kill him. You must save Holmes."
And he was smart enough, because he killed him by having him fall off of a cliff, right?
Yeah,
and then it turns out he didn't really die or something like that, right?
No, it's the most wonderful of Hollywood trickery is that the evil Professor Moriarty,
right,
his nemesis, you just see them fall over the Alps, and
that leads us to comics, the world of comics. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and in movie serials,
and it's really central to literature,
Yeah,
and that's the kind of, it's a little machine that generates influence in every direction,
Yeah,
that's what classics do,
Yeah, and it just after his hiatus to do historical fiction, which he did do, he had an opening there because evidently the way that scene was written, Holmes miraculously had found a trail below the abyss, above it. He got out of there.
And then he didn't kill him, but it's so interesting because he had other interests too, Doyle. He got into spirituality, and not spirituality, spiritualism. Not spiritualism. How do you call it?
What you call it, like the survival of people's spirits, speaking to the voices of
spiritism.
Yeah. So you get a phone call from your dead grandma, basically, and it's fascinating because he did have so many interests. A medical doctor, trained as a surgeon, and later, when he could have plateaued there, he still went to study to become an ophthalmologist,
and also like an inventor. He came up with a machine. Was it a vest or a machine gun? I got to read up on that. The next time we talk, I will definitely. He wanted to contribute to society, and he was also like a good cricket player.
Yeah, just a fully accomplished individual, and
his whole family, his wife and had died in a car accident, I think. And after that, he really was curious about contacting the spirits, ghosts, and he wrote about it. And
it makes me think, and just because he was so scientific, and there was a part of the deductive and rational Holmes is definitely in his character. So it wasn't a you sense it wasn't a delusion when a man like this takes about the last 10 or so years of his life to go on a spiritist crusade through talks and travels around the world, and maybe
a little bit to the detriment of Sherlock Holmes, though, and other things.
I would say, yeah, because
he was done with it.
I don't know if he left it or, but definitely it seems like that's the energy went there, and it's.
Who cares? He gave us those characters, he gave us those novels, and he deserved his last few years of trippiness.
Yeah, and just for the sake of his reputation, I saw some tidbit that the London newspaper covered. He went to see a séance, and after it was all over, he said, I don't know if I'm really convinced. I think I'll have to give this thing a closer look.
Maybe maybe sit in a yogi like kind of way all night smoking shag. That's how he'll figure it out.
Yeah, a lot of shag and doused with absinthe.
There you go. But we'll talk a lot more about Sherlock Holmes and Conan Doyle and other things. I think it's a good point. Unless you want to remind us about who you are and what, maybe just a little closing statement, and then I'll do mine, and then we'll call it a day.
Yeah, my pleasure. This is Graydon Miller. I am the Wizard of Fiction, author of short stories, The Havana Brotherhood, and creator of one detective named Tony Santana. My also novel, Mujeres con Navajas, currently available in Spanish.
And also as an audiobook in Spanish.
Absolutely. And it will take you to a memorable drama in California.
So if you go to Amazon.com, and we'll put all the links here, you'll see Graydon Miller, and you type up Graydon Miller, you'll see a list of books there.
And if
in English, in Spanish, comedy writing, also.
Yes, and as for also Patricio X Maya, they will find your book of poetry,
80 miles per hour.
Yeah. And
Walking Around with Fanchon Bukowski, book of essays. And
literature.
Other works we've worked on, which is the
Aldo Tambellini
writing.
Is, oh yes, or 80 miles per hour anthology.
It's a bilingual anthology with a lot of contemporary writers and narrators, poets, artists, journalists.
And that one is presented in dual Spanish, one part Spanish and the other section is in English.
Right, and we have published the works of Aldo Tambellini.
Yes.
The great Italian-American poet who passed away recently, but who we hold dear, a good friend, amazing poet, great artist who's had a show solo at the Tate. He's made a place for himself in the history of modern art, film, and poetry. So if you want to look up his work, look up for Aldo Tambellini, collected poems of Aldo Tambellini on Graydon Miller books. You can just type it up on Amazon or Google and it'll come up.
It's called Listen, and I feel you're the people out there, you'll be rewarded, because although he's got something to offer our time, and it's poetry that's clear, and it's sometimes full of whimsy, and it's the gruesome modern life too. It's his seen from Aldo Tambellini's window. It's if I want to see the joys and the sorrows or the crimes, I'll take it from Aldo almost before anybody else. Put it that way, and exactly. You'll be rewarded.
He very much in the vein of Lawrence Ferlinghetti, I would say, and with a more wild imagination, I would say. Same righteousness, wilder imagination.
Yeah, his imagination is it is a circus. It is indeed.
And then we also have the works of a couple novels by the Mexican writer Roberto Villa, right? The late Roberto Villa. Los
I'll just
Árboles.
say briefly, a prize-winning Mexican author, a master in the form of the short story, whose novelistic work is virtually unknown in his native Spanish as well as the rest of the world.
And we're gonna edit the novels again. Los Árboles, right?
Yeah, that's
And Laberinto Recto, that's all in the works.
yeah, so much to look forward to. And I hope there's some Villistas out there and get to hear us in the future too, when we do something about approach to Roberto Villa.
Exactly. So we got our hands full here, and in a good way. Our hands full of projects and our minds full of literature and words and poems, and we'll be sharing with you guys and audience, and talking about our projects, our own stories, our own narratives, and that of the writers we admire most. In this case, Arthur Conan Doyle, who has given us so much, and literature, which is the gift that keeps on giving, right?
It does. I think is there life without literature? I can't imagine.
Yeah, and even worse than life without coffee.
Conan Doyle is the one that gave me inflicted the pain of knowing that in life sometimes you yearn to get back to literature because it's a mirror, a better mirror of life, and
it's a more realistic rendition of life.
Indeed. Well, thank you, Patricia, so much.
Thank you. Great
step.
Yeah, we'll do it again, and look for us on Facebook, 80 miles per hour, 80 underscore miles per hour, MPH. Look for Greater Miller, look for myself, and we'll be in touch.
Until next time, thank you.
Until next time, thank you. Have a good one.